Well, first of all, welcome and thanks everybody for coming. This is kind of new to me. I haven't taught anything in a really long time, so bear with me. But I'm happy to answer any questions, and even after the class, if you have any questions, feel free to message me. I'm not a guru or anything. What I'm going to teach you tonight is a little bit about your layer menu, what it does, and how I use it when I draw. So, here we go. So here is your layer menu. You will notice on your canvas in the top left-hand corner there is a button that looks like sheets of paper, and that is your layer menu. This is what will pop out from there. You'll see on the left-hand side are where your layers sit. On the top right is where your opacity is, which changes how much you see of the layer or not, and I will show that to you. Then we have your blend modes and your operations. The blend modes are filters that we will get to. The operations is basically anything that does stuff, actually does stuff to your layer. Okay, I know that this is probably a little hard to read in stream, but this is a layer tutorial that I uploaded a while back with just some basic ideas, and I just wanted to show it to you and kind of run through it with you real quick. So you'll see up in the top left corner what we talked about is where your layer menu sits, and I will circle it for you. So you'll notice your layers on the left, and they have a couple of icons next to them. Each rectangle is a different layer, and they come completely transparent. So the white that you see is actually just because there is nothing there. You'll notice the eyeballs on the left-hand side, which is your visibility toggle, and you'll notice that when you tap it once, it will toggle it between being seen and not seen on your canvas. So you can show it or you can hide it. On the right hand side, you'll see the 3 lines, and this is, I like to think of it as like a gripper. This will let you move the layer up or down above another layer. You'll notice that one of your layers will be highlighted in blue, and what this means is that this is the active layer that you're drawing on currently. So if weird things happen, you should check that first to make sure that you are drawing on the right layer. Yes, Bunny. I don't understand why, but sometimes when you stream, people will see only part of the sketch or like 2 sketches in one, and all you have to do is toggle layer, and it usually fixes that problem. Yes, I actually just found out about this double tap feature like 2 days ago, accidentally. So imagine my surprise when all my layers disappeared. Okay, so in general, I like to think of my layers as a stack of transparencies. I don't know if everybody here is old enough to remember the overhead projector transparencies. They're all clear. When you stack them on top of one another, each layer, comes together and it makes one image. So that's how I look at them. Okay, so the opacity is basically a percentage of how opaque or solid you would like your layer to look. So at the end of the day, if you want it to be less visible, you would turn the opacity down. And if you want it to be a solid layer, if you want to not see through the layer, then you would just turn it up to 100. and the default is 100. Yeah, I don't know if anybody, remembers Disney cells where they did the animation and they would paint on these clear sheets of plastic, or I'm not sure exactly what it was, but anyway, you get the point. It was like drawing on a transparency. So I'm going to skip over the blend modes for just a minute and head down to operations. You will notice the load image button. It does exactly what it says. It will load an image from either your photo or we have a gallery in SC for templates and overlays and coloring sheets. PK, sometimes I turn down the opacity, say if I have taken a layer and done highlights on it, maybe they're too harsh, and so I'll turn down the opacity to just kind of soften them up. But it's basically anything you want to see some of the underlying work through. So when you press the load image button, you will see this menu. It will show you that you can choose from your photos. BP has kindly added charts for recently added and most downloaded items. And then below that are all the community templates to choose from. Once you see the load image menu and you choose, here I've chosen textures down in the community templates menu, then this is the menu that pops up and it will show you a preview of the template or texture and the name and what kind community member has supplied it. Templates do not count as image loads in your stats. It will show that you have chosen that template or texture from the gallery that we have. So you'll see below load image is the color fill, and what that will do is allow you to choose a solid color to completely fill the layer. So you do not want to do this on a layer that you have drawn stuff that you would like to keep. Essentially, I use this for either filling a background or sometimes I will do like a full color overlay layer and I'll choose a solid color for that. When you hit the color fill button, you will see the menu pop out on the left, which is the color wheel, or at least that's what pops out first for me. That's what I typically use. But you will see a button in the top right that says swatch, and that will allow you to choose from the menu on the right, which is some provided swatches that you can choose from. Alright, so we're going to hop over to the clear button, which is pretty self-explanatory. If you do something on a layer and you decide you just want to scrap the whole layer, then you hit the clear button. And yes, undo works with clear, thankfully. Just to knock out the easy ones, at the very bottom you'll see copy down. What that does when you hit it is most literally copy down whatever is on your active layer onto the layer below it, which will then make the layer below it active. Sometimes I like to keep a copy of something if I've got a spare layer that I can park an image on. I might keep a copy and toggle it so that it is no longer showing, and work on the copy that I made so that if I want to start over again, I just have to clear one layer. Next to the copy down button is the merge down button, and it will do essentially the same thing as copy, but you will not have a copy. It will just take whatever your active layer is, put it on the layer below it, and make the layer below it your new active layer. Okay, so then we get to the filter button, which I'm going to show you on a different set of slides what that does, and transform. But basically, filter allows you to do some color changing, it lets you blur, there's just a lot of different features you can use to give some effect to the items on your layer. It does affect your whole layer though. Now transform lets you transform the image in size and placement, and I'll show you those menus in just a second. Okay, when you hit the transform button, this is the menu that will, this is what your canvas will turn into. So you'll notice the buttons at the bottom. You can flip the image horizontally, which is flip X, or vertically, which is flip Y. You can rotate it in increments of 45 degrees with the buttons in the center. And on the right, you'll notice the little gears, which have a whole different set of functions. So you can tap that and this little menu pops out. Okay, so the gear menu, the settings menu there is something quite new, and I want to thank you, Black Pawn, for this. It's wonderful. The top field, which is the triangle X, means the change in X, which is your horizontal line. You can move an image left or right at a specified amount. So you type in a number and you get an idea for the scale, and then you'll always keep the image on the same horizontal line. The change Y does the same thing, but it will move the image up or down on your vertical line. Now you'll see the next line is your width, and it's a percentage. So you can actually make an image wider without changing its position, meaning its rotation, and without changing the height. Before you could only change the width and the height together, but this allows you to basically stretch it out. So for instance, if you put in 150%, your image will be 150% of the size it was before. I'm not sure I explained that right, but it will be 50% more, I'm sorry, 50% wider than it was initially, but the entire width will be 150%. So the height does the same thing, but to the height instead of the width. And below that, you will see angle, and this allows you to rotate an image to a particular angle. So whereas before we could only do 45%, and we can only do 45% with those buttons in the center, here we can put in any percentage we want to rotate something just a little or more than that 45%. Now beneath the angle rotation, you will see a sliding toggle for tiled, and this I honestly have not played with very much, but this allows you to tile your image so it will repeat it across your layer. Okay, so here I'm showing what your canvas will look like when you hit the filter button. And I will be perfectly honest and say I don't use most of these. I use the color adjustment and the blur and maybe the invert quite a bit, but not a lot of the others. So that might be for another class. And to be perfectly honest, sometimes it's just easiest to learn what all these things do if you just make some sort of doodle and then try them out. Because you always have your undo button. Now, I can sing the praises of the color adjustment because my color skills suck, and I tend to change the colors. You'll notice I have a lot of filters on my sketches, and that's usually because I want to change some sort of color issue. So here you'll see you can change the contrast, which makes you see it's a little bit more harsh on the lights and darks when you increase the contrast, but it softens the difference when you decrease the contrast. The brightness allows you to make an image a little bit more white and brighter, or a little bit darker and a little bit more black. Basically, it's just adding white or black to your image. Now the saturation allows you to increase the intensity of a color or decrease the intensity of a color. So the more you increase it, the more deeper the color gets, richer, darker, not darker in shade, but just more intense. If you decrease the saturation, it gets a little bit more gray and a little bit more gray until it's just basically a black and white. Now, hue is probably my favorite toy, my favorite cheat, because maybe I'll do something and I don't really like the color, or I add something else to my sketch and realize that I have too much of a color in there and I want to kind of change it. I can slide the hue scale up or down and it will take you through the color wheel, essentially. But your image will change, all the colors in your image will change according to that scale. It's pretty cool. So my best advice is to give it a try. Now, while I don't have a slide on it, I use blur a lot. So say sometimes you want to just soften up a whole layer that you've drawn in your background, or for a shadow, something like that, then you can choose blur, and it will default to a blur of 10, but you can increase that blur, which basically fans out the edges for you. It's kind of like using the smudge blur, but on a grand scale for your whole layer. Sorry, little button pushing. Okay, so getting back to the blend modes just real quickly. I'm not a blend mode expert, and I believe that somebody else is going to be doing a class just on blend modes. But I wanted to tell you that blend modes are ways that you can change your current layer, and it will be dependent on what's below it. So this is not, you are not altering your layer, you are just changing how it relates to the layers below and sometimes above. So here is just a very quick layman's rundown of these blend modes and just how I look at them. I don't know all of the technical aspects of, what they do, why they do, but this has just been my experience. So you'll notice the first one is normal. That is, what you're most likely going to be using most of the time. Below it is multiply, which will then make it transparent and darken the colors. Screen is like putting a screen over whatever's below it. So it will look like there's some light coming through. It will lighten your image in the end. Overlay will brighten things. I like to think of it like a glaze over something. You're not actually, painting something over it. You're just giving it an extra hint of color. So anything that's on that layer that's an overlay will color over the items below it. So darken will darken the image. Lighten will lighten the image. Dodge is like a severe lighting layer. I encourage you to play with it, and the best way to do that is to put a dark layer over your other layers and use a light color on a very light opacity and go over where you would like some highlight and shine. It takes some finesse, but it's a cool filter, cool blend mode to use. Burn mode is a severe darkening of your colors, and so that's kind of a neat thing to play with. I don't use it an awful lot, and hopefully somebody will explained to me the best reason to use a burn mode. Below that is soft light, which is basically, I don't know if you know about the bulbs, like lamp bulbs, so like a soft light makes the contrast less, and a hard light will increase your contrast between your colors. I don't use those very often either. I don't have a good layman's explanation for difference and exclusion. They're kind of a color wheel algorithm worked out. But they're neat to try, especially if you're going to play with making textures and stuff. If anybody was in Kingmaker's class, it's kind of a neat thing to try. The hue is exactly what it says. It's the hue of what's on your layer. So it will be pure. The saturation, anything that's darker will appear in a dark bluish color, has been my experience. Anything lighter will be in a lighter color, blue. I guess BP could explain more why I would use a saturation layer. I would love to know. So then you also have color, which is essentially if you want to color over something. I don't use that. I use an overlay if I want to color over something, but this is an option. And luminosity will show you, it will be a transparent black and white look. So if you have color underneath it, that will show through, and if you have a black background, then it will just show the black and white. Below that is an on layer, and this is probably what you will use most often. An on layer is awesome. If you use a brush in on mode, this does the same thing but to the whole layer. It will only allow you to color on things that have a base of something below it, and it will not color on the transparent areas of what's below it. that's kind of an overview of the different layers. I just wanted to draw a little something since you know, it's hard for me to show you what they do and show you the layer menus at the same time. I wanted to be able to just draw something and show you how I use the different layers, you know, in a standard sketch, just some of the more common ways I use them. So, for instance, I will first draw you an object. Okay, so here I've drawn an object, and I've put a black background at the bottom of my layer stack. So now let's say I want to make a cutout. Say I want to put it's too much stuff, and instead of drawing over it, I want to make a cutout. I would just take and erase part of this, which I'm going to do, and you will see the background below it. So that is why you always put your foreground objects on a layer above a background. Since I don't like making decisions up front, this really gives me flexibility to change whatever I put in the cutout or whatever I put behind the object, which I must admit I typically save the background for last. I'm not a good planner, so this gives me freedom. So I went to a layer above all of those three layers, and I've turned it to on mode so that I can shade just the purple object and nothing inside or outside of that object, since the rest of my layer is transparent. And by having that white part in the center on the layer below the object, I can go back and I can add shading, I can alter that without messing up my top object. Betty, when you merge down an on layer, it will retain the effect. And how did I get the gradual lighting of colors? Oh, I used a vector gradient tool. So if you go to vector, one of the settings is to turn the gradient fill on, and you can do that too. So I'm going to go ahead and merge down my on layer to my purple object to my white bubble in the center, so that will all be one piece, and then I'll still have the black as its own layer background. Now, a lot of people ask about some kind of masking feature, and this is kind of the down and dirty way to do some masking effects by just using the copy down button and your vector erase or some other eraser tool. So I guess try to follow along in the layers, but I think it will become evident what I'm doing when you see it. So I copied down my object onto a new clean layer, and I'm going to turn one of them off. If you have something that is not the same shape and you want to see know where things are, you can just turn down the opacity of one of them so you can see what you're working on. Okay, so here I've done a transform with my new image, and I'm going to make these all, I'm just going to show you how I can cut away and see things on the different layers and then merge them all together so it's one image. You wouldn't always use this. There are easier ways in some instances, but sometimes you want to. Say if you want to move a limb on a person or something like that. So now I'm just going to transform this again and show you a couple of position movements with the transform tool. We're going to rotate and just move position, so you'll see how those work. So there I changed the width percentage and the height percentage to make it squishy. I resized it and copied down. I transformed and I used the plus 45 rotate to get that second image. But now I'm going to merge those two layers and keep transforming in increments of 45 degrees until I get all the way around. So you'll see that I changed the opacity of a couple of them, and then I merged them all together. You know, this is just kind of some fun playthings that I do with the stuff in the layer menu. Now I'm going to do a hue change. That would be under your filter menu, under color adjustments, and it's that bottom slider, the one we talked about. That's a lot of fun. Now sometimes you want a glow behind something, so a particular object, sometimes in graffiti, and I'll put a glow behind this weird shape. But basically I copy down each layer in the order from bottom to top that I want to see them, so that, you know, you make sure that the things you want on top are on top. And that's just a habit. And then I bring that below everything and vector on a color over the whole object. And this will really bring out what the more transparent opacity has done for us. I'm now going to take and use the filter button and then go to blur, and I'm just going to increase the blur slider to make that glow. To make it a little more intense, I'll copy down a second copy, which just spreads it out a little bit more. It just makes everything more intense because it's twice the layer, twice the color. Okay, I think I just talked to the iPad without hitting the button. Okay, so just to finish up, I was going to run through a couple of the blend modes, and I'm sure there are a million ways to use them and probably better ways than I use them, but I like to kind of cheat a little bit. So what I did is I made another copy of both of my main layers, the purple and the brown, and I've brought that to the top. So there was your multiply and your screen. There's an overlay. I'll tell you, this is a cheap trick of mine. Total pro tip is that if you have an object and you want to give it some non-realistic but semi-convincing highlights, you can copy your image and make it an overlay on top, and it'll help with the shading and the highlighting. So like there's a dodge. Total Intense. I think it's a little bit too rich for my blood most of the time, but it's fun to play with. Julio, you're so funny. So I just kind of flashed through some of the different filters at full opacity, just so you can kind of see their most intense. I also just changed the hue on this one, so that's why there's a little extra blending of colors. But I guess that's pretty much it, unless anybody has any questions. I know some of the menus are kind of tedious, but I definitely wanted to give you a feel for what all the buttons do. It'll be better Sunday, I promise. Okay, so your homework is to sketch a lot and learn to love your layers and your layer menu, and make sure to try all the different features just to play around, because it's a great little tool, great little place to be. I love the layer menu. Yay! Thanks, everybody. I know I ran a little late. I'm sorry about that, but hopefully got a little better understanding of what your layers do.